She was 24 and flat broke. Not short for the week, broke all the way down, with no wages coming, no family to write to, and no roof that would still be hers tomorrow. And with $1 silver, the last money she owned, she bought a shuttered hotel on the main street of a fading rail town in the Wyoming territory, a tall frame building the county had been unable to sell for years. The porch railing had rotted through. The upstairs windows were dark and blind. The land agent in the county seat told her the town was emptying, the trade was gone, and a young woman alone in a dead hotel with 12 empty rooms would be broke again before the snow. But what nobody knew, not the agent, not the town, not the girl herself, was that behind a walled-off room on the second floor of that old hotel, sealed since 1876, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Augusta Lark had spent her whole life making other people comfortable and had never once had a room of her own. She was born in 1868 in a Wyoming rail town, the daughter of a hotel cook, and she had grown up in the back halls and hot kitchens of other people's hotels, carrying trays before she was tall enough to see over them, learning to make a bed with hospital corners at 7. Learning the whole invisible craft of hospitality from a mother who could turn a bare room and a cold traveler into warmth and welcome in the space of 10 minutes. Her mother taught her that a hotel was not a building but a promise, that a stranger who came in off a hard road would be fed and warmed and safe under your roof, and that this promise was the oldest and most sacred one people made to one another, older than money, older than law. It is the whole of the trade, her mother said. Anyone can rent a bed. Not everyone can make a person safe. Her mother died when Augusta was 16, and after that Augusta worked hotels the way her mother had, in the back halls, invisible, chambermaid, then cook. Then, in the good years, the one who actually ran the place while some proprietor's name hung over the door. She was extraordinary at it. Everyone said so. Travelers wrote letters praising the hotel at Rock Bend and never knew they were praising a chambermaid who did the whole work of a manager for a chambermaid's wages. But an unmarried woman with no capital and no family had no way to become anything but the hands behind another person's business, and Augusta learned, year by year, the peculiar exhaustion of being the reason a place works and never being allowed to own any part of it. What finally put her out was ordinary, which is how these things usually go. The hotel she had run in all but name for 6 years was sold, and the new proprietor came with a wife who meant to run it herself, and Augusta was thanked and paid off with 2 weeks' wages and told there was no place for her. She was 24. She had a carpet bag, a small store of her mother's things, a recipe book, a set of good linen napkins, nothing worth money, and a single silver dollar left after the room she'd had to take. And she had, though nobody in the world would have given her $1 of credit for it, the entire working knowledge of how to run a hotel, and nowhere on earth to run one. She heard about the hotel the way hotel people hear things, in a depot lunchroom from a drummer complaining about his territory. There was a dying town off the main line, he said, Halloran, that had been a real division point until the railroad moved the shops east, and its hotel had stood shuttered for years, a good big building rotting on the main street. The county would take $1 for it just to clear the tax roll. Who'd want a 12-room hotel in a town nobody stops in? The drummer laughed. But Augusta Lark did not laugh. She had $1. And a hotel, even a dead one, in a town the trains had mostly abandoned, was the one building in all the world she knew how to bring to life. The whole of her mother's trade, and her own, waiting behind a boarded door for someone who knew what a hotel was actually for. She rode away freight down to Halloran and walked up from the depot into a town 3/4 emptied, a long main street of frame buildings weathered silver, a good many boarded, the great roundhouse at the edge of town standing empty where 100 men had once worked, the whole place holding the particular sadness of a railroad town the railroad had left. There were maybe 200 souls remaining, and in the middle of the street, the tallest building in Halloran, stood the hotel, 3 stories of frame and porch, its long veranda sagging and its railing rotted through. Halloran House still legible in faded gilt across the front, its windows dark, its double doors chained. To the drummer it was a rotting hulk on a dead street. To Augusta, standing in the dust looking up at all those dark windows, it was 12 rooms and a kitchen and a dining room and a promise waiting to be kept again. The county's business was done in the county seat, at a land office run by a brisk, skeptical man named Wendell Pryor, who could not think what she wanted with it. The Halloran House was worthless, he told her. The town had lost the railroad shops and would not get them back. The hotel had been shut since old Mrs. Delacourt, who kept it, passed. Years ago, a hotel needs travelers, and Halloran had none. There was nothing in the building, Pryor said, but dust and rot in 12 rooms nobody wanted. $1 would put it in her name. And his honest counsel was to keep the dollar and take work in a town with a future. Augusta laid her silver dollar on his desk, the last of everything, and signed her name in the neat, clear hand of a woman who had kept a hotel's books for 6 years without ever being allowed to sign them, and Wendell Pryor gave her the deed and a key and the settled expectation that she would be back inside the season. She was not back inside the season. Word went ahead of her in Halloran, the way it does in a town of 200, that a girl had bought the old hotel, and the town received it with the tired blankness of a place that had watched every good thing leave. But there was one who did not, and she was the one who mattered. An old woman named Berthy Ivers, who had been a laundress at the Halloran House in its great days, and had stayed on in the town when the trains left, came up the street with a shawl over her head to look at the girl unchaining the hotel doors. She stood a long moment looking up at the dark windows, and then she said, in a voice with something odd and careful in it, that Augusta had bought a good house, that Mrs. Delacourt had kept it well, and kept it kind, and that there were women in 3 states who had reason to remember that hotel, though they'd not say so out loud. Augusta asked what she meant. And old Berthy Ivers looked at her a long moment, weighing something, and then said only that some houses are more than houses, and went home. But she came back the next day with a bucket and a brush, and the day after with bread, and she stayed, and Augusta, who had never once been welcomed anywhere, found she had, at last, one person glad she had come. The chains came off, and Augusta stepped into the Halloran House, and where the town saw a rotting hulk, she saw her mother's whole trade laid out and sleeping. The long dining room with its tall windows, the kitchen with its great range, rusted but sound, the front desk of good oak, and behind it the pigeonholes for the room keys, and the register still lying open on the desk where the last guest had signed years ago. And up the stairs, along the second-floor hall, the doors of the 12 rooms, each with its china number, standing shut on years of dust. Augusta walked that hall with her hand on the wall, opening doors, counting rooms, and behind the front desk of a hotel that was hers by deed and dollar, she felt something she had never felt in 24 years of making other people comfortable, that she was standing in her own house, and that the promise it made was hers to keep. She chose a room that first night, number 4, at the front, because it had the best window, and slept in a guest bed for the first time in her life. It undid her more than she expected. All those years of hotels, and she had never once slept in one. She had slept in the attic rooms and the back passages and the cot behind the kitchen, in the spaces hotels keep for the people who make them work. She had turned down 10,000 beds for strangers and never lain in one. And now she lay in a dusty guest room in a dead hotel in a dying town, with a rotted veranda below her window and $1's worth of deed in her carpet bag, and looked at the ceiling and thought, "This is mine." Not the wages of it, not the work of it. The house. She thought of her mother, who had done this same work for 30 years and died in a back room, and she found she was crying, quietly, the way people cry when a thing they never let themselves want turns out to be possible after all. In the morning she got up and washed and went down and started on the kitchen. Because grief is best answered with work, and because there was a town outside that had not had a decent hot meal in 6 years. She had $1 gone and nothing coming in, so she did what her mother had taught her, which was to give first. The town of Halloran had no place to eat and no place to gather. The last of that had died with the railroad shops. So Augusta cleaned the kitchen and the dining room before she touched a single guest room, and she opened the dining room of the Halloran house for meals, plain, cheap, and very good, because she was her mother's daughter. And the 200 remaining souls of a town that had not had a decent public table in 6 years came, first out of curiosity, and then out of gladness. And the dining room became what it had always been meant to be, the warm center of a cold town. Old Berthy Ivers came to help in the kitchen and never quite left. Within a month, Augusta was making enough to eat and to buy paint, and within 2 she had a small steady trade from the freight crews and the few travelers the branch line still brought, and the Halloran house had begun, room by room, to wake. She restored the hotel the way her mother had taught her to turn a bare room into a welcome, one room at a time, completely, before moving to the next. She scrubbed and aired and papered and painted, and she opened up the 12 guest rooms one after another along the second-floor hall. And it was in the doing of that, in her 4th month, that she found the thing the house had been keeping. It was the hall that told her, and it was a hotel keeper's own knowledge that made her listen. She had been counting rooms all her life. A hotel is a machine made of rooms, and a person who has run one knows the arithmetic of a floor the way a sailor knows his rigging. And the arithmetic of the Halloran house's 2nd floor was wrong. She had 12 doors on that hall, and 12 rooms behind them, but the hall itself was longer than the 12 rooms could account for. Between the door of number 7 and the door of number 8 there was a stretch of blank papered wall a full room wide, and no door in it. She stood in that hall with a lamp and measured it out with her arms, twice, because she had learned exactness in 6 years of running another man's hotel. There was a room behind that wall, a 13th room with no door, papered over so smoothly that in the dim hall no eye would ever catch it. She knew the wall was a lie the way she knew a made-up bed from a smoothed-over one, by a wrongness underneath the surface. And when she held the lamp close and looked properly, she could see it. The faint outline where a door had been, framed and plastered and papered over. The work of hands that had wanted it gone, not hidden hastily but sealed with care. Augusta stood a long time in that hall. Then she went down for a bar and came back up, and she broke through the plaster of a wall in her own hotel, and opened a room that had been shut for 20 years. The air that came out was still and dry and smelled of dust and old lavender. She held the lamp through and then stepped in. It was a small back room, no window but a high fanlight painted over, and it had not been emptied, it had been left, deliberately. The way you leave a room you mean someone to find. There was a narrow bed, made up, its linen gone yellow. A washstand. A chair. And on a little writing table in the center, set out plainly, 3 things: a locked tin cash box, a thick-bound ledger of the kind hotels use for registers, and a letter, folded and addressed on its face in a fine old-fashioned hand, to the woman who opens this room. Augusta's hands, steady through 1,000 crises of other people's hotels, were not steady now. She sat down on the edge of the yellowed bed and read. If you have found this room, it began, then you have counted the doors on the hall and found them one short, and only a woman who truly knows how to run a hotel would ever have done that, which is exactly the woman I have been waiting for. So sit, my dear, and let an old hotel keeper tell you what this room was, and what I am asking of you, for it is a great deal, and you must be free to say no. Her name had been Constance Delacourt, and she had kept the Halloran house for 31 years, and the room Augusta was sitting in had been, for most of those years, a hiding place, not for money, for women. I will say it plainly, she wrote, because I am dead now and can afford plainness at last. In 31 years of keeping a hotel on a rail line, I learned that a hotel is one of the few places in this country where a woman may arrive alone at night with a bag and no explanation, and where no one will think it strange. And so they came to me, not many, 4 or 5 a year, but steadily, for 31 years, women who had run. Wives running from husbands who beat them. Girls running from men their families had promised them to. Women with children and no money, and nothing ahead of them but a train and a hope. In those years there was no law and no society and no help of any kind for such women. A wife had no standing, no property, no protection, and a husband who came looking for her had the whole weight of the world on his side. There was nothing but a few women quietly helping other women, hotel to hotel, station to station, all down the line, and I was one of them, and this was my room. She had built it, Augusta read, in the 2nd year of her keeping. A room off the hall with its door papered over, and a second way in. A narrow stair from the kitchen passage, hidden behind the pantry shelving, which Mrs. Delacourt described exactly, and which Augusta would find precisely where the letter said. A woman who arrived at the Halloran house frightened and pursued could be given a plain room on the register like any guest, and then, if a man came asking, could vanish into a room that did not exist in a hotel where no one knew there was a room to look for. And there she could stay, fed and warmed and hidden, for a night or a week or a month, until the danger passed, or the next train came, or word came back down the line that the next house was ready to take her. I sheltered 141 women in this room, Constance Delacourt wrote, and I lost none of them. Not one was found. I have written every one of them in this book, not their names, for names were dangerous, but the date and the circumstance and where they went on to, so that there would be some record that they existed, and that someone helped them. It is the only account of that work that exists anywhere, and it is the truest thing I ever made. And then the ask. I am old now, and my heart is failing, and I have faced a hard thing, that when I die, this house will be sold, and the work will stop. I could tell no one living, the work only survived because almost no one knew of it, and a secret told to the wrong soul would have ended it and endangered every woman on the line. So I have done the only thing I could think of. I have sealed this room, and I have left in the box the whole of my savings, 31 years of an economical woman's earnings. And it is a great deal more than you would guess, and I have written this letter and left it for whoever should someday come and open this hotel again, and be woman enough and hotel keeper enough to count the doors. Here is what I am asking, she wrote. The money is yours regardless, freely, with no condition. Take it and mend this house and make your living and let an old woman's savings do some good in the world. But if you can, and only if you can, I ask you to keep the room. There are still women running, my dear. There will be women running long after you and I are dust, and a hotel is still the one place a frightened woman can walk into at night and be given a bed without a question asked. If you have it in you, keep this house kind, and keep this room ready, and write your own dates in the back of my book. If you cannot, tear this letter up and think no worse of yourself, and I thank you for opening the window, for the room has been shut a long while. C. Delacourt, her hand. In the last spring of my life, 1876, Augusta Lark sat on the yellowed bed in a room that had not been opened in 20 years, with the letter in her lap and the lamp throwing her shadow on the wall, and she understood that she was not holding a treasure. She was holding a post, a watch that a dead woman had kept for 31 years and had died hoping someone would take up. She opened the register. It was exactly as Constance Delacourt had said, no names, only dates, and a line or two in a fine careful hand for each. A woman from the east, arrived on the night train, gone west in 4 days. A mother and 2 children, kept 11 days, sent on to the house at Chase. A young girl, 17, kept a month while her arm mended, gone to work in a laundry in Denver, and wrote once to say she was well. 141 entries across 31 years. the whole invisible history of a small, stubborn mercy written down by the only person who knew it had happened. And Augusta wept over that book, sitting on the bed, because she had spent her entire life being the invisible hands behind another person's hotel, and here in her own hands was proof that invisible work, the deepest, most invisible work there is, could be the thing that saved 141 lives. She read every entry that night, all 141, sitting on the yellowed bed with the lamp burning down. They were only a line or two each, and there were no names, and yet by the end she felt she had met them all. The woman who arrived barefoot in February, the mother whose youngest would not stop crying and had to be soothed for 4 days so that no sound would carry, the girl who had walked 11 miles in the dark and slept for 30 hours before she could speak. Constance Delacourt's careful hand never editorialized, never pitied, never made a story of it. She wrote them down the way a hotel keeper writes a register, plainly, as guests. And Augusta understood that this was itself the mercy, that these women, who had been treated as property and as trouble and as somebody's runaway, had been received in this house simply as guests, given a bed and a meal and a shut door, and written down in a book as people who had passed through and gone on to a life. That was the whole of it. Not rescue, exactly. Hospitality, extended to the people the world had decided did not merit any. And it was the exact thing her mother had taught her in the same words: 30 years and 200 miles away, anyone can rent a bed. Not everyone can make a person safe. Then she opened the tin box, and it was as the old woman had promised, 31 years of an economical hotel keeper's savings, coin and notes. A sum that made Augusta sit back and put her hand to her mouth. Enough to mend the whole house from cellar to roof and keep it running for years. More money than she had seen in her life. She told old Berthy Ivers, because she was the only soul she had, and because of the strange, careful thing the old woman had said on the first day. And when Augusta read her the letter, Berthy Ivers put her face in her hands and wept. And then she told the truth she had carried for 20 years. She had known. Of course she had known. She was the laundress. She had washed the linen from a room that did not exist. She had carried food up the pantry stair more times than she could count. Mrs. Delacourt had never spoken of it, and neither had she, in 30 years, not once out loud, because the work only lived in the silence around it. She had thought, when the old woman died and the house was shut, that the whole thing had died with her, and she had grieved it, and she had never breathed a word, and she had watched the hotel rot for 20 years and never told a living soul what was behind that wall, because whom could she tell? And here at last was someone she could tell. And Augusta Lark said yes. She said it before she had quite finished thinking it, and never once took it back. She used Constance Delacourt's savings exactly as the old woman had wanted, and openly, and it did what it was meant to do. It brought the Holleran house back. She mended the sagging veranda and the rotted railing, papered and painted the 12 rooms, put glass in the dark windows, and reopened the hotel properly. The dining room busy, the rooms let, the great range hot from before dawn. A real hotel again in a town that had been living without one. And Halloran, which had been quietly dying, found that a working hotel is a kind of heart. Freight crews laid over there, the branch line trade grew, drummers came who had not come in years, and a town that had been counting its last days found it had reason to keep going. But the thing that mattered most in that house was never on the register. She kept the room. She kept it exactly as Constance Delacourt had kept it, the papered-over wall restored so that no eye could find it. The hidden stair behind the pantry shelving kept clear. The narrow bed made up fresh and aired every month against a guest who might come at any hour or might not come for a year. And they came. Not many, 4 or 5 a year, just as before, arriving off the night train with a bag and a face that Augusta had learned to read across a lobby in 1 second flat. Because a woman who has spent her life in the back halls of hotels knows exactly what fear looks like when it is trying to seem ordinary. She gave them a room on the register like any guest. And when a man came asking, as men sometimes did, standing in her lobby with his hat in his hand and his voice reasonable, Augusta Lark would look him in the eye and say, plainly and without a flicker, that no such woman had stopped at her house, and behind a papered wall on the second floor, a woman would be sitting very still in a room that did not exist, in a hotel where no one knew there was a room to look for. She wrote her own entries in the back of Constance Delacourt's book, in her neat, clear hand, continuing the record, the date, the circumstance where they went on to. No names. She kept that house for the rest of her working life, and when she finally counted up her own entries, late in her life, there were more than 200 of them under her own hand, and none of them had been found. She thought of it, privately, as the only real ledger she kept. The hotel's books balanced or they didn't, and either way the world went on, but the book upstairs was the account of what the house had actually been for, and she balanced that one to the soul. She never spoke of it publicly, and it never made the newspapers, and that was precisely the point. The work lived in the silence around it. What the town of Halloran knew was only that the Halloran House was a fine hotel again, and Augusta Lark was a fine hotel keeper, and if the town noticed that some women arrived at that house at odd hours and were not seen leaving, the town, which was mostly women who understood a great deal without being told, chose, in its own quiet way, to notice nothing at all. A grocer's wife would send up extra eggs some weeks without being asked and without remarking on it. The doctor's widow would occasionally leave a bundle of plain warm clothing on the kitchen step, in various sizes, and never once mention having done so. It was a conspiracy of a kind, conducted entirely in things unsaid, and Augusta came to believe it was the truest picture of that town she ever saw. Wendell Pryor, the land agent who had told her she'd be broke again by the snow, lived to see the dead Halloran House become the best hotel on the branch line and the town come back from the edge, and came through on business within 2 years and had the grace, over a plate of her dinner in the crowded dining room, to tell her he had never been so glad to be so wrong about a town or a girl. Old Berthy Ivers stayed in that kitchen until she was past 80, and the two of them, the young hotel keeper and the old laundress, kept the room together for 30 years and never once spoke of it above a murmur. When Berthy died, Augusta wrote a single line in the back of the register, out of order and unnumbered, that was not about a woman who had run, but about one who had stayed. She washed the linen for 30 years and never told a soul. There is no braver thing in this book. If you go to Halloran today, and there is still a town there, small and stubborn on a branch line, where a dozen railroad towns around it have gone entirely to grass, the Halloran House still stands, the tallest building on the main street, and it is a hotel yet. The 13th room is open now, at last, its wall taken down, on purpose, and it is kept as it was, the narrow bed made up, the washstand, the chair, the high, painted-over fanlight. In a case beside it lie 2 things: a hotel register that contains not one guest's name in 340 entries across 60 years, and a folded letter in a fine old-fashioned hand that begins, "To the woman who opens this room." And the people who keep the house now bring visitors up the stairs and tell them the story of the hotel keeper who built a room that did not exist, and the broke chambermaid who counted the doors on the hall and found them one short, and said yes. Painted on the wall of that room, in the words Augusta Lark left when she finally handed the house on, is the whole creed of the trade her mother taught her: anyone can rent a bed. Not everyone can make a person safe. There is a kind of inheritance that has nothing to do with blood, and everything to do with keeping watch. It waits behind the sealed walls of the world, not for the one who wants a fortune, but for the one who will take up a post that a dying woman could not put down. And it seems always to find the person who has spent her whole life doing the invisible work, and so will understand exactly why the work has to stay invisible. The world had told Augusta Lark she was worthless the same way it had told that hotel it was dead, with a dismissal and $1 and 12 dark windows. It only ever takes one person willing to keep a promise in secret to prove the world's cold arithmetic wrong. Augusta Lark was 24 years old and flat broke. She had $1 silver to her name, and she spent it on a shuttered hotel on the main street of a dying rail town in the Wyoming Territory. It was the best dollar she ever spent. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, has someone ever quietly made you safe and never once asked for the credit? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.